In the beginning, there was light. Not the harsh electric glare of modern civilization, but something older, something that hummed with an energy that connected all living things across the endless expanse of space. The Force flowed through the galaxy like an invisible river, touching everything, binding everything, and in the hands of those who could feel its current, it became something more than philosophy or mysticism. It became power. And with that power came the need to defend, to protect, to stand against the darkness that inevitably rises wherever light exists. Long before the Clone Wars, before the fall of the Republic, before even the ancient conflicts that would shape galactic civilization for millennia, there existed warriors who walked between worlds, carrying weapons that defied the natural laws of physics. These were the Jedi, and in their hands they wielded lightsabers. But these elegant weapons did not spring into existence fully formed, perfectly balanced instruments of justice. Their story, like all stories worth telling, began with trial and error, with experimentation and adaptation, with the slow, careful work of masters, who understood that a weapon is only as effective as the hand that guides it, and the mind that directs that hand. The lightsaber emerged from necessity. Traditional weapons, swords forged from metals drawn from 1,000 different worlds, had served warriors well for countless generations. Steel bit into flesh, vibroblades hummed with destructive frequency, and force pikes crackled with energy. But the Jedi, those who could touch the Force and bend it to their will, needed something more. They required a weapon that could channel their connection to that universal energy, something that could serve as an extension of their very being. The answer came in the form of a blade, made not of matter, but of pure energy, focused and contained by kyber crystals attuned to the Force itself. The earliest lightsabers were crude by later standards. They were bulky, unwieldy things that required external power packs connected by cables. Warriors who carried these primitive weapons into battle found themselves tethered to their energy sources, limited in their movements, vulnerable in ways that traditional swords had never been. The blades flickered and sputtered, sometimes failing at critical moments, sometimes burning too hot or too cold. They were ceremonial objects more than practical weapons, beautiful to behold but difficult to trust in the chaos of actual combat. But technology, like the Force itself, evolves. Engineers and artificers worked alongside Jedi Masters to refine the design, to miniaturize the components, to stabilize the energy flow. Gradually, over generations of development, the lightsaber became what we recognize today. The blade ignited with a distinctive snap hiss, holding steady and true. The hilt fit comfortably in a single hand, balanced perfectly, responding to the slightest shift in grip or angle. And most importantly, the weapon became reliable, dependable, worthy of trust in the moment when hesitation meant death. As the lightsaber evolved, so too did the need for a systematic approach to wielding it. Warriors who had spent their lives mastering the sword found that their old techniques, while helpful, were insufficient for this new weapon. A lightsaber blade had no weight, no mass beyond the hilt. It cut through nearly anything with equal ease, requiring no force behind the blow, no momentum to drive through armor or bone. The rules had changed, and with them, the methods of combat had to change as well. This transitional period, this time between the old ways and the new, gave birth to what would become known as Form 1, the first systematic approach to lightsaber combat. But to those who created it, to those who refined it, through endless practice and painful lessons learned in actual battle, it bore a different name. They called it Shii Cho, and in that name lay the essence of everything it represented. The origins of Shii Cho are lost to the depths of time, buried beneath thousands of years of Jedi history. No single master can claim credit for its invention. No ancient text definitively states when or where it first emerged as a distinct discipline. This uncertainty is not accidental. Shii Cho developed organically, naturally, as a synthesis of multiple sword-fighting traditions adapted to accommodate the unique properties of the lightsaber. Countless Jedi contributed to its evolution, each adding techniques, refining movements, discovering principles that worked and discarding those that failed. Imagine the training halls of the ancient Jedi Temple, back when the Order was young and the galaxy vast and largely unexplored. Masters would gather their students, lightsabers newly crafted, crystals newly bonded to their wielders through meditation and the Force. These students, many of whom had trained with traditional swords before constructing their lightsabers, would begin by attempting to apply their old knowledge to these new weapons. They would perform the standard attacks, the proven defenses, the time-tested maneuvers of sword combat. Some techniques transferred well. A parry is a parry, whether you are deflecting a steel blade or a beam of contained plasma. The basic concept of protecting one's body by intercepting an incoming attack remained sound. But other aspects of traditional swordplay proved not just inadequate, but actively dangerous when applied to lightsaber combat, a technique that relied on the weight and momentum of a metal blade to power through an opponent's defense, became awkward and overextended when performed with a weightless energy blade. A defensive stance designed to let heavy blows glance off angled armor proved useless against a weapon that could cut through that armor as easily as empty air. Through trial, through error, through careful observation and endless repetition, the early masters of Shii Cho began to understand what worked and what did not. They documented their findings, teaching them to their students, who in turn refined and expanded upon the knowledge. Over time, a coherent system emerged. Stances were codified. Target zones were designated. Specific attacks and defenses were named and categorized. The chaotic experimentation of the early days gave way to structured training, and Shii Cho became not just a collection of techniques, but a true combat form. The name itself carries meaning that speaks to the philosophy underlying the form. Shii Cho derives from two concepts in basic, the most common language of the Republic. The first part, Shi, comes from Shim, which refers to light, superficial cuts. These were not intended to kill, not meant to hack through bone and muscle, but rather to mark, to wound lightly, to cause pain and fear without permanent maiming. In the context of Jedi philosophy, which valued all life and sought to preserve it whenever possible, this emphasis on minimal necessary force made perfect sense. Why kill when you could disarm? Why maim when you could wound just enough to end the threat? The second part of the name Cho referred to a family of dismemberment techniques. Cho Mok involved removing a leg or the non-dominant arm. Cho Sun targeted the weapon arm specifically. Cho Mai aimed for the weapon hand itself. These techniques represented escalation. The steps one might take when Shim cuts proved insufficient when an opponent continued to press the attack, despite pain and injury. Even these more severe techniques, however, were designed with a specific purpose in mind: to end the fight decisively, while still offering the possibility of survival and even eventual recovery for the defeated opponent. Together, Shii Cho represented a balanced approach to combat, one that acknowledged the necessity of violence in a galaxy where evil existed and needed to be confronted, while never losing sight of the ultimate goal of preservation and peace. It was, in essence, the physical manifestation of the Jedi Code applied to lightsaber combat. But Shii Cho bore other names as well, titles that revealed different aspects of its nature and application. To some, it was known as the determination form, a reference to the mental state required to execute it effectively. Shii Cho demanded commitment, an unwavering resolve to press forward, to advance step by step, cutting off angles, limiting an opponent's options, driving them back through sheer persistence. Unlike forms that would come later, which emphasized finesse or acrobatics or overwhelming power, Shii Cho was about determination, about the steady, inexorable advance of a warrior who would not be denied. This determination carried with it certain dangers. Shii Cho fostered an emotionally heated mindset, a state of focused aggression that could easily tip over into something darker if a practitioner lacked sufficient self-control. The wide, sweeping attacks of the form, the emphasis on pressing the advantage, the focus on decisive action rather than defensive caution. All of these aspects could tempt a warrior toward excessive violence, toward lethal intent, toward the kind of anger and hatred that led to the dark side of the Force. Every Jedi who studied Shii Cho, from the youngest Padawan to the most experienced master, had to learn this fundamental lesson. The form gave you power, gave you the ability to dominate a battlefield, but it also tested your commitment to Jedi principles. Could you wield aggressive techniques without becoming aggressive yourself? Could you press an attack without giving in to the thrill of violence? Could you maintain control when your blood ran hot and your heart pounded with the adrenaline of combat? These were not easy questions, and not every student mastered the answers. The third name by which Shii Cho was known spoke to its nature in perhaps the most evocative way, the way of the Sarlacc. On the desert planet of Tatooine, in the barren wastes of the Dune Sea, there lurked a creature of nightmare. The Sarlacc was a beast that buried itself in the sand, concealing its massive bulk beneath the dunes, presenting to the unwary traveler only a gaping maw surrounded by tentacles. When prey drew near, those tentacles would lash out with startling speed, emerging from unexpected angles, grabbing and pulling victims toward the central mouth, where they would be consumed and digested over the course of 1,000 years. The comparison to Shii Cho was apt on multiple levels. Like the Sarlacc's tentacles, the attacks of Form 1 came from multiple directions, sweeping in wide arcs that could strike several opponents simultaneously. The form specialized in engaging multiple enemies at once, using broad movements to control space and limit the options of anyone foolish enough to get close. The unpredictability inherent in master-level Shii Cho, the way a skilled practitioner's blade seemed to flow from one target to another without apparent pattern or predictability, evoked the chaotic lashing of those alien appendages. But there was a deeper meaning as well. The Sarlacc was patient, persistent, inescapable once its prey was caught. It did not rush, it did not panic. It simply held on and waited, confident in its inevitable victory. Similarly, a Shii Cho practitioner advanced with relentless determination, accepting that individual attacks might be parried or dodged, but understanding that persistence would eventually wear down any defense. Step by step, angle by angle, the space in which an opponent could maneuver grew smaller until there was nowhere left to go, and the fight ended on the Jedi's terms. The philosophy of Form 1 centered on a principle the Jedi called Sun Gem, a term in the ancient language of the Force users that translates roughly as disarmament. This was more than just knocking a weapon from an opponent's hand, though that was certainly part of it. Sun Gem represented a complete approach to combat that prioritized ending fights without taking lives. If you could destroy an enemy's weapon, or force them to drop it, or remove the hand that held it, you had won the engagement, without the need for lethal force. Your opponent still lived, still breathed, still had the opportunity to reflect on their choices, and perhaps choose a better path. This emphasis on disarmament shaped every aspect of Shii Cho's techniques. Many of the form's most characteristic attacks were specifically designed to target weapons rather than wielders. The disarming slash, one of the signature techniques of Form 1, involves striking at an opponent's weapon with sufficient force and at the correct angle to either shatter it or rip it from their grasp. When executed properly, this single attack could end the confrontation instantly, leaving your opponent alive but helpless, forced to either flee or surrender. Of course, the galaxy was not always kind enough to provide opponents willing to surrender once disarmed. Some enemies fought with such fanaticism or desperation that they would continue attacking even after their primary weapon was lost, using fists, claws, environmental objects, whatever came to hand. In such cases, the Jedi using Shii Cho had to be prepared to escalate, to employ those Cho techniques, those deliberate dismemberments that would physically prevent further combat. Even then, the goal was not death, but incapacitation. A warrior without a weapon hand could not continue the fight, but they could still live to see another day. This philosophy of minimal necessary force, of always seeking the option that preserved life while still achieving the objective, was quintessentially Jedi. It reflected their understanding of the Force as something that connected all living beings, making the death of even an enemy a diminishment of the greater whole. It demonstrated their commitment to compassion, to the belief that redemption was always possible, that today's foe might become tomorrow's ally given the chance to change. And it honored their recognition that the easy path, the quick solution of simply killing everyone who opposed you, led inexorably toward the dark side and the corruption of everything they stood for. But for all its noble philosophy, for all the high-minded ideals it represented, Shii Cho was also intensely practical. It had to be. Philosophy that could not stand up to the brutal reality of actual combat was worse than useless. It was dangerous, liable to get well-meaning warriors killed. The masters who developed Form 1 understood this. They were not naive dreamers. They were veterans of countless battles, survivors of conflicts that had tested them in every way possible. The techniques they codified, the principles they taught, emerged from hard-won experience and paid for in blood and sacrifice. The fundamental structure of Shii Cho began with recognition that humanoid bodies, the most common form of sentient life in the galaxy, shared a certain basic vulnerabilities regardless of species. A Twi'lek, a human, a Rodian, all had heads that controlled their bodies, limbs that could be disabled, torsos that housed vital organs. By dividing the body into distinct zones and designing attacks to target each zone systematically, Shii Cho provided practitioners with a mental framework for combat that reduced complex, chaotic fights into manageable decision trees. The 8 primary target zones of Shii Cho covered the entire body. Zone 1 was the head, the control center, the most critical target. Zone 2 covered the left arm and shoulder. Zone 3 mirrored it on the right side. Zone 4 encompassed the back, a vulnerable area for most species. Zone 5 targeted the upper left leg. Zone 6 the upper right leg. Zone 7 addressed the lower left leg, and Zone 8 the lower right leg. By training to recognize these zones instinctively and to switch between them fluidly, a Shii Cho practitioner could engage multiple opponents simultaneously, directing attacks at different zones on different targets in rapid succession. This zone-based approach did more than just organize offensive options. It also provided a framework for defense. Every attack coming toward you was targeting one of these 8 zones, and by recognizing which zone was threatened, you could execute the appropriate parry or dodge without conscious thought. This kind of automatic response, trained into muscle memory through thousands of hours of practice, allowed Jedi to fight effectively even when outnumbered, even when attacked from multiple directions, even when the situation was too chaotic for careful analysis. The stances of Shii Cho reflected the form's origins in traditional swordplay, while adapting to the unique properties of the lightsaber. The opening stance, the position from which most attacks would begin, varied slightly depending on the practitioner's tactical goals. An aggressive opening stance placed the dominant foot back, weight distributed to allow a powerful forward step, as the attack launched. The lightsaber was held at hip level, directly in front of the navel, angled 45 degrees upward, ready to sweep either left or right, or thrust forward in a straight line. A defensive opening stance reversed this positioning, placing the dominant foot forward, weight distributed to facilitate a backward step if necessary. The blade position remained largely the same, but the mental preparation was different. In defensive stance, the practitioner focused on reading their opponent, watching for tells, waiting for the right moment to counterattack. Both stances were valid, neither inherently superior to the other. The choice depended on the tactical situation and the personality of the warrior. Some Jedi preferred to seize initiative immediately, to force opponents onto the defensive from the opening moment. Others favored a more patient approach, content to let aggression come to them and then capitalize on the openings that aggressive attacks inevitably created. From these stances, the fundamental techniques of Shii Cho flowed with a logic born of countless battles. The basic horizontal slash, perhaps the simplest attack in the form, involves sweeping the lightsaber blade in a horizontal arc aimed at one of the target zones. Despite its simplicity, this attack was devastatingly effective when properly executed. The lightsaber blade, with its ability to cut through almost any material, turned the entire arc of the swing into a zone of lethal potential. An opponent could not safely block such an attack with armor or shields. They had to parry with their own lightsaber, or dodge entirely out of range, or accept serious injury. The Sarlacc sweep represented an evolution of this basic horizontal slash, adapted specifically for engaging multiple opponents. Where a standard slash might target a single zone on a single opponent, the Sarlacc sweep extended the arc, taking advantage of the lightsaber's cutting power to threaten everyone within range simultaneously. A Shii Cho master executing a Sarlacc sweep would often pivot their entire body, using the rotation to generate reach and to bring the blade through a full 360-degree arc if necessary. Opponents surrounding them found themselves forced to defend or retreat, and those who chose wrongly paid the price immediately. This technique exemplified one of Shii Cho's greatest strengths, its effectiveness against multiple opponents, where later forms would be developed to excel in specific situations, dueling another Force user, defending against blaster fire, overwhelming opponents with acrobatic attacks. Form 1 remained versatile and broad in its applications. It worked against groups of enemies better than any other form, because its wide, sweeping motions naturally covered more space, threatened more targets, and created more chaos among coordinated attackers. The disarming slash, perhaps the most philosophically important technique in Shii Cho, required significantly more precision than the Sarlacc sweep. Rather than simply sweeping through space and hoping to connect with something, the disarming slash targeted the opponent's weapon specifically. The goal was to strike the weapon at exactly the right point, and angle to either shatter it or send it flying from the opponent's grip. This demanded excellent timing, precise control, and a thorough understanding of different weapon types and their vulnerabilities. Against a traditional sword or staff, the disarming slash aimed for the point of weakest structural integrity, the place where impact would most likely cause the weapon to break. Against a blaster or vibroblade, the target was the wrist or forearm of the hand, holding the weapon, using the lightsaber's cutting power to sever tendons and muscles, without completely removing the limb. Against another lightsaber wielder, the technique became significantly more difficult, as an opponent trained in lightsaber combat would instinctively defend their weapon and know how to maintain their grip even under pressure. This limitation against fellow Force users proved to be one of Shii Cho's critical weaknesses, one that would eventually lead to the development of Form 2, Makashi, specifically designed for the lightsaber-to-lightsaber combat. But in the early days, when Shii Cho was being developed, such concerns were largely theoretical. The Jedi had few enemies who wielded lightsabers. Their opponents were pirates, warlords, crime lords, and other threats who used conventional weapons. Against such foes, the disarming slash was extraordinarily effective, ending fights quickly and decisively, while minimizing casualties on both sides. The Cho techniques represented the escalation ladder within Shii Cho, the progression from non-lethal to increasingly serious levels of force. These were not techniques used lightly or casually. Each represented a deliberate choice to inflict lasting harm on an opponent, and each required the practitioner to be absolutely certain that such harm was necessary and justified. The Jedi Council, in their wisdom, taught these techniques to ensure their warriors had options when facing truly dangerous foes, but they also emphasized the weight of responsibility that came with such knowledge. Chomak, the first of these techniques, involved removing either a leg or the non-dominant arm of an opponent. The choice between leg and arm depended on the tactical situation and the nature of the threat. Removing a leg would ground an opponent immediately, eliminating their mobility and forcing them to crawl or drag themselves to continue any attack. This proved particularly effective against species that relied on running speed or jumping ability as part of their combat style. Removing the non-dominant arm, while not quite as immediately incapacitating, severely limited an opponent's options and often proved sufficient to convince them that continuing the fight would be unwise. Chosun escalated further, targeting the dominant arm, the one holding the weapon. For right-handed opponents, this meant the right arm. For left-handed foes, the left. This technique acknowledged that some enemies would not cease their aggression even after losing a limb, that they would simply switch their weapon to the other hand and continue attacking. By targeting the dominant arm, the arm with years of training and muscle memory, a Shii Cho practitioner could ensure that even if the opponent continued to fight, their effectiveness would be drastically reduced. Chomai, the final and most precise of the dismemberment techniques, removed only the weapon hand itself. This represented the minimum necessary force to completely prevent an opponent from wielding their weapon while still preserving as much of their body as possible. A warrior without a hand could not hold a blaster, could not swing a sword, could not operate most weapons effectively, yet they retained their arm, their mobility, their ability to survive and function in society after the fight ended. Many Jedi preferred Chomai when forced to escalate to dismemberment, seeing it as the option that best balanced immediate tactical necessity with long-term compassion. The execution of any Cho technique required absolute precision, unlike the broad, sweeping attacks that characterize much of Shii Cho. These strikes had to land exactly where intended. A cut aimed at removing a hand that instead severed the entire forearm was a failure of control and infliction of unnecessary harm. A strike meant to disable a leg that instead simply grazed. It was a tactical failure that left a dangerous opponent still fully capable of fighting. Precision came from training, from thousands of repetitions until the movements became automatic, until the practitioner could place their blade exactly where intended, even in the chaos of life or death combat. This requirement for precision highlighted an interesting dichotomy within Shii Cho. The form was simultaneously simple and complex, basic and sophisticated. Its wide, sweeping attacks appeared crude, almost brutish in their directness. Yet the ability to transition smoothly from those broad movements to pinpoint strikes demanded exceptional skill and control. A novice practitioner of Shii Cho looked clumsy and uncoordinated, their attacks wild and easily predicted. A master made the form appear fluid, natural, like watching water flow over falls, each movement leading inevitably to the next, power and grace combined in perfect balance. This transformation from novice to master was particularly striking in Shii Cho because the form itself did not change substantially. The techniques remained the same. The stances, the zones, the basic attacks all remained constant. What changed was the practitioner's understanding and execution. A student learned the moves mechanically, by rote, practicing until their body remembered the patterns. But true mastery came only when the mechanical gave way to the intuitive, when the practitioner stopped thinking about which zone to target or which technique to employ, and simply moved, allowing the force to guide their actions, trusting their training to manifest at the crucial moment. The emotionally heated mindset that Shii Cho fostered played a crucial role in this transition from mechanical to intuitive. The form demanded that practitioners engage fully in the moment, committing completely to each attack, each defense. This heightened emotional state, properly channeled through Jedi discipline, actually enhanced performance. Reactions became faster, movements more fluid, awareness more acute. The practitioner existed in a state of flow, that rare psychological condition where peak performance feels effortless, and time itself seems to slow down. But this same emotional intensity created danger. The line between controlled aggression and uncontrolled rage was thinner than many students realized. The thrill of combat, the rush of adrenaline, the satisfaction of successfully executing a difficult technique, all of these could become addictive, could begin to shape a practitioner's relationship with violence in unhealthy ways. The dark side whispered to those who let their emotions run too hot, suggesting that giving in fully, abandoning restraint, would make them even more effective, even more powerful. Every Jedi Master who taught Shii Cho had to address this danger directly with their students. They had to teach not just the physical techniques, but also the mental discipline required to employ those techniques ethically. They had to help students recognize the warning signs in themselves, the anger that lingered after a training session, the eagerness for the next fight, the disappointment when conflicts resolved peacefully. These were not moral failings, necessarily. They were natural human, or Twi'lek, or Zabrak, or any of 100 other species, responses to stress and excitement. But left unexamined, left unchecked, they could grow into something darker, something that twisted a Jedi's purpose, and ultimately led to their fall. The training regimen for Shii Cho reflected this dual focus on physical technique and mental discipline. Younglings in the Jedi Temple began learning Form 1 almost as soon as they could hold a training saber. These early lessons were intentionally simple, focused on building muscle memory and developing basic coordination. The younglings learned to recognize the 8 target zones on mannequins and on each other. They practiced the opening stances until standing in position felt natural and comfortable. They performed slow-motion attacks, emphasizing proper form over speed or power. As students progressed, the training intensified. They began sparring with remotes, those floating training droids that fired harmless stun bolts at irregular intervals. This taught them to deflect projectiles, while maintaining awareness of their surroundings and positioning. It developed the split-second timing required to intercept an attack, and the spatial awareness necessary to know where threats were coming from without having to look directly at them. These skills, while valuable in all forms of lightsaber combat, were absolutely essential for Shii Cho practitioners, who often found themselves surrounded by multiple opponents, firing from different angles. Later still, students began sparring against each other, first in carefully controlled scenarios with heavy safety equipment and training sabers set to their lowest power settings, then gradually moving toward more realistic conditions as skill and confidence grew. These sparring sessions taught lessons that no amount of solo practice or remote work could provide. They taught students how to read an opponent's intentions from their body language and positioning. They demonstrated the psychological aspects of combat, the importance of maintaining composure under pressure, the advantage of confidence, the danger of overconfidence. They revealed each student's natural tendencies, their strengths and weaknesses, their habits and tells. Masters observed these sparring sessions carefully, providing feedback and guidance. A student who relied too heavily on horizontal slashes would be paired against an opponent who could exploit that predictability. A student who struggled with multiple opponents would face scenarios specifically designed to challenge that weakness. The goal was not just to build on existing strengths, but to identify and address limitations, to create well-rounded practitioners who could adapt to whatever circumstances they encountered. For all its sophistication, for all the careful thought that went into its development, Shii Cho had fundamental limitations that became increasingly apparent as the Jedi Order encountered more diverse threats. The form's greatest strength, its effectiveness against multiple opponents, was also the source of its greatest weakness. The wide, sweeping attacks that made Shii Cho so effective for crowd control left practitioners vulnerable in single combat situations against skilled opponents. An enemy fighting one-on-one had complete freedom of movement. They could circle, retreat, advance, feint, employing all the tactical mobility that multiple opponents would deny each other. Against such an opponent, the broad attacks of Shii Cho became liabilities. They took longer to execute than more compact techniques, creating windows of opportunity for counterattack. They were easier to predict and dodge than the precise economical movements of more refined forms. They exposed the practitioner's body during the wide wind-up and follow-through that the sweeping motions required. A truly skilled single opponent could exploit these weaknesses systematically. They would maintain distance during the Shii Cho practitioner's attacks, staying just out of range, refusing to engage when the odds were against them. Then, during the recovery phase, that brief moment when the practitioner was bringing their blade back to a defensive position, the skilled opponent would strike, targeting the openings that inevitably appeared. Against such tactical fighting, Shii Cho struggled to find answers within its own technical framework. This limitation became critically important when Dark Jedi and Sith began to emerge in significant numbers. These were not conventional warriors using blasters and vibroblades. These were Force users with lightsabers, trained in combat, equally capable of destroying their opponents. When Jedi practicing Shii Cho faced such enemies in single combat, they found themselves at a distinct disadvantage. The Sith and Dark Jedi could avoid the wide sweeping attacks while capitalizing on the openings those attacks created. The Jedi Order's response to this weakness led directly to the development of Form 2, also known as Makashi. This new form, created specifically to address lightsaber-to-lightsaber dueling, emphasized precision over power, economy of motion over sweeping attacks, defensive blade work over aggressive advancement. Where Shii Cho was built for battlefield conditions against multiple foes, Makashi was tailored for the formal duel, the one-on-one confrontation between skilled warriors. Makashi practitioners trained specifically to counter Shii Cho's tactics. They learned to recognize the wide wind-ups that preceded major attacks and to exploit them. They developed techniques to maintain perfect weapon retention, making the disarming slash nearly impossible to execute successfully. They practiced tight, controlled movements that offered no openings for their opponents to exploit. In head-to-head combat between a Shii Cho specialist and a Makashi master of equal overall skill, the Makashi practitioner held a significant advantage. This dynamic created an interesting situation within the Jedi Order. Form 1 did not become obsolete with the development of Form 2. Rather, it found a new primary role as the foundational training that all Jedi received, the first form they learned, the basis upon which later specialization would be built. Every Jedi, regardless of which form they eventually mastered, began with Shii Cho. They learned its stances, its zones, its basic attacks and defenses. These fundamentals proved invaluable, regardless of which direction their training eventually took them. Even Jedi who specialized in other forms often found themselves falling back on Shii Cho in certain situations. When all else failed, when more sophisticated techniques proved inadequate or inappropriate for the circumstances. The simple direct approach of Form 1 often provided a solution. This versatility, this reliability as a fallback option, ensured that Shii Cho remained relevant for thousands of years after more advanced forms had been developed. The Clone Wars, that galaxy-spanning conflict that would eventually lead to the fall of the Republic, and the near extinction of the Jedi Order, brought an unexpected resurgence in the practical application of Shii Cho. The war pitted the Grand Army of the Republic, composed primarily of clone troopers, against the Separatist Alliance and their vast droid armies. These armies consisted primarily of B-1 series battle droids, cheaply manufactured units designed to overwhelm through sheer numbers rather than individual capability. The battle droids presented a unique challenge for the Jedi. They were not intelligent in any meaningful sense. They could not learn from their mistakes, could not adapt to changing conditions, could not employ the kind of tactical thinking that living soldiers developed naturally. But they existed in staggering numbers, and they carried weapons capable of killing Jedi as easily as anyone else. Fighting them required techniques optimized for engaging multiple opponents simultaneously, for controlling large areas of the battlefield, for cutting through enemy formations efficiently. Shii Cho proved ideally suited for this task. The form's wide, sweeping attacks could disable multiple droids with each blow. The battle droids' predictable programming made them vulnerable to the deliberate, advancing tactics that characterize Form 1. Their lack of defensive sophistication meant that the relatively straightforward attacks of Shii Cho connected far more often than they would against living, thinking opponents. Jedi, who had primarily trained in other forms, found themselves revisiting their Shii Cho fundamentals, rediscovering techniques they had set aside years earlier in favor of more specialized approaches. This resurgence was not total. The Clone Wars also involved substantial amounts of blaster fire, as droid armies typically combined melee units with extensive range support. Jedi using pure Shii Cho struggled to defend against the volume of incoming fire that characterized major battles. Most practitioners adapted by incorporating defensive techniques from Form 3, Soresu, and counterattack techniques from Form 5 Dijemso. This hybrid approach allowed them to deflect blaster bolts effectively, while still employing Shii Cho's advantageous techniques against the droids themselves. Among the Jedi of the Clone Wars era, one name stood out as the preeminent master of Form 1, Kit Fisto. This Nautolan Jedi master, instantly recognizable by his green skin, large black eyes, and head tentacles that responded to his emotional state, exemplified everything that Shii Cho could accomplish in the hands of a true master. His story, his battles, his approach to combat illustrated the form's potential in ways that theoretical discussions never could. Kit Fisto's background was unusual for a Jedi of his era. He hailed from Glee Anselm, a planet largely covered by water, and like most Nautolans, he possessed natural amphibious abilities that allowed him to breathe and move underwater with perfect ease. This aquatic background influenced his approach to lightsaber combat in subtle ways. His movements possessed a flowing quality, a sense of being perfectly comfortable in three-dimensional space, of understanding that combat was not limited to a horizontal plane. But what truly distinguished Kit Fisto was his personality. While many Jedi Masters cultivated an aura of solemn dignity and serious contemplation, Fisto was known for his ready smile and sense of humor. He brought joy to his duties, approaching even the most dangerous missions with confidence and good cheer. This was not naivety or failure to appreciate the seriousness of his responsibilities. Rather, it reflected a deep understanding that fear and stress impaired performance, while confidence and positive emotion enhanced it. By maintaining his emotional equilibrium through humor and optimism, Fisto ensured that he could perform at his peak when circumstances demanded it. his mastery of Shii Cho was recognized throughout the Jedi Order. Fellow masters considered him one of the finest duelists of his generation, and his reputation extended beyond the Order to military commanders and even to some of the Republic's enemies. This recognition was earned through countless engagements during the Clone Wars, battles where his skills were tested against some of the most dangerous opponents in the galaxy. One of the most notable of these confrontations occurred on the planet Vasek, in the Third Moon's ancient fortress, where General Grievous, the supreme commander of the Separatist droid armies, had established a lair. Grievous was no ordinary opponent. This cyborg warrior had been trained in lightsaber combat by Count Dooku himself, and possessed a mechanical body that allowed him to wield 4 lightsabers simultaneously. He had killed numerous Jedi, collecting their lightsabers as trophies, and his reputation as a Jedi killer was well deserved. Kit Fisto entered Grievous's lair as part of a mission to gather intelligence on the Separatist commander. What he found was a trap, and he soon found himself facing Grievous directly in a confined space that negated many of the advantages a Jedi normally enjoyed. A lesser warrior might have panicked, might have tried to flee or stall for reinforcement. Fisto instead engaged immediately, recognizing that hesitation would only give his opponent more time to activate whatever additional defenses the fortress certainly contained. The duel that followed demonstrated everything that made Form 1 effective even against seemingly overwhelming odds. When Grievous activated all 4 of his arms, each wielding a stolen Jedi lightsaber, Fisto did not retreat or try to defend against each blade individually. Instead, he employed the wide, sweeping attacks of Shii Cho to engage all 4 lightsabers at once. His blade moved in continuous arcs, forcing Grievous to coordinate his forearm defense, preventing the cyborg from bringing all his weapons to bear on a single target. This approach perfectly showcased Shii Cho's design philosophy. The form had been created to handle multiple opponents, and while Grievous was technically a single opponent, his 4 arms effectively made him a group threat. By treating each arm as a separate enemy and using Sarlacc sweep techniques to attack them all simultaneously, Fisto neutralized Grievous's numerical advantage. The general found himself forced onto the defensive, unable to coordinate effective counterattacks while dealing with the constant pressure of Fisto's blade. But Kit Fisto's mastery extended beyond simple technique. He demonstrated the quick thinking and tactical awareness that separated competent practitioners from true masters. When he recognized vulnerabilities in Grievous's mechanical body, the exposed joints, the connection points between organic and cybernetic components, he adapted his attacks to target these weaknesses specifically. During the course of the duel, he managed to sever one of Grievous's hands and damage several of his legs, significantly impairing the cyborg's combat effectiveness. The engagement on Vasek eventually ended without a decisive victory for either combatant. Fisto escaped, though he was unable to capture or kill Grievous, but the tactical victory was clearly his. He had faced one of the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy, had survived and inflicted significant damage, and had done so while outnumbered 4-1 in terms of lightsabers. This feat spoke volumes about both his personal skill and the effectiveness of Shii Cho when wielded by someone who truly understood its principles. Kit Fisto's versatility with Form 1 extended to dual wielding, a variation known as Jarkai. While most Shii Cho practitioners used a single blade, Fisto demonstrated that the form's principles could be adapted to accommodate 2 lightsabers. This modification required significant adjustments to the basic techniques. Sweeping attacks became more complex when coordinating 2 blades instead of 1. The target zones had to be divided between the 2 weapons. The opening stances required new hand positions and weight distribution, yet Fisto made it appear effortless. His 2 blades moved independently but harmoniously, each following the principles of Shii Cho while complementing the other. When facing multiple opponents, he could engage 2 separate enemies simultaneously. his right blade crossing with one foe's weapon, while his left blade targeted another. The complexity of defending against such attacks proved overwhelming for most opponents, even skilled ones. They found themselves unable to track both blades, unable to anticipate which weapon would strike next, forced to defend purely reactively while Fisto maintained complete offensive initiative. The Battle of Geonosis, the opening major engagement of the Clone Wars, provided another showcase for Fisto's abilities. The Jedi assault on the Separatist droid foundries required combatants to fight in multiple challenging environments: the dusty arena floor, the dark factory corridors, the open battlefield where thousands of droids faced hundreds of Jedi and clone troopers. In each environment, Fisto's Shii Cho proved effective, adapting to the changing circumstances while maintaining its fundamental character. In the arena, surrounded by battle droids and facing execution, Fisto employed defensive Shii Cho, using his blade to deflect incoming blaster fire, while positioning himself to protect more vulnerable Jedi nearby. When the opportunity for offense presented itself, he transitioned smoothly to aggressive Sarlacc sweeps, cutting through multiple droids with each attack. On the battlefield, as droid armies marched in formation, his wide attacks proved devastatingly effective at creating breaches in their lines, allowing clone troopers to advance through the gaps he created. Perhaps most impressively, Fisto maintained his characteristic smile throughout the battle. Even in the midst of chaos, with death threatening from multiple directions, he projected confidence and competence. This was not bravado or false courage. It was genuine calm, born from absolute trust in his training and his connection to the Force. That smile became legendary among clone troopers who fought alongside him, a symbol of hope in the darkest moments, a reminder that the Jedi truly were everything they were said to be. Yet even Kit Fisto's mastery had its limits. The confrontation that would ultimately cost him his life demonstrated that no form, no matter how well executed, could overcome every challenge. When the Clone Wars reached their final stages and the truth of Chancellor Palpatine's identity as Darth Sidious was revealed, Fisto joined Jedi Masters Mace Windu, Shii Cho, and Agent Kolar in an attempt to arrest the Sith Lord. They entered Palpatine's office with the full authority of the Jedi Council, prepared for resistance, but not for the sheer magnitude of dark side power they were about to face. The engagement lasted mere seconds. Sidious moved with speed that seemed to defy physics, his red blade appearing in his hand as if materializing from the dark side itself. Shii Cho fell first, then Agent Kolar. Both struck down before they could mount meaningful defenses. Kit Fisto, drawing on all his years of training and his mastery of Form 1, managed to engage Sidious directly, his green blade meeting the Sith Lord's crimson one. For a brief moment, Fisto held his ground. His Shii Cho techniques, honed through decades of practice and refined through countless real battles, allowed him to parry Sidious's initial strikes. The wide defensive sweeps of Form 1 created space between him and the Sith Lord, buying precious seconds. But seconds were all they were. Sidious was not just skilled in lightsaber combat. He was a conduit for the dark side itself, channeling power that twisted reality around him. The duel ended when Sidious unleashed a combination of strikes that overwhelmed even Fisto's defenses. The Nautolan Master fell, and with him fell the proof that even the greatest practitioners of Shii Cho could not overcome every threat. This was not a failure of the form, or of Fisto's mastery. It was simply the reality that in a galaxy filled with beings of extraordinary power, combat was never truly predictable, never completely under one's control. The best training in the galaxy could not guarantee survival against an enemy of Sidious's caliber. Kit Fisto's legacy, however, extended far beyond the manner of his death. His life demonstrated what Shii Cho represented at its highest expression, not just a collection of techniques, but a philosophy of combat that balanced effectiveness with restraint, power with compassion, determination with joy. He inspired countless Jedi, showed clone troopers that their generals truly were worthy of respect, and proved to the galaxy that the old ways, the foundational forms, still had value in modern warfare. While Kit Fisto stood as the most prominent Form 1 master of the Clone Wars era, he was far from the only skilled practitioner of Shii Cho, who left their mark on galactic history. Throughout the millennia, various Jedi employed Form 1 with distinction, each adding their own innovations and perspectives to the ancient art. Their stories, while sometimes less well known than Fisto's, reveal the versatility and enduring relevance of the form across different eras and circumstances. Lucien Dre presented a fascinating case study in Shii Cho mastery. This Jedi Master lived during the era preceding the Mandalorian Wars, a time of relative peace for the Republic, but internal tension within the Jedi Order. Dry came from the elite Dry family, a dynasty of wealthy financiers with deep ties to Jedi affairs. His mother, Krinda Dry, was a legendary Jedi seer, gifted with the ability to glimpse possible futures through the Force. His father, Barristan Dry, had been a skilled Jedi Knight, who died in the Great Sith War when Lucien was young. This lineage created expectations that young Lucien struggled to meet. His mother hoped he would inherit her gift for precognition, the ability to see what was to come and guide the Order accordingly. But while Lucien proved strong in the Force and capable with its various applications, prophecy eluded him. He could not see the future as his mother did, could not pierce the veil of possibility to glimpse what was approaching. This perceived failure led Krinda to largely ignore her son's training, focusing instead on other students who showed more promise in the area she valued most. The task of training Lucien fell to Hazen, the family retainer, a former Jedi himself, though one who had never achieved particular distinction. Hazen recognized that while Lucien might lack his mother's prophetic gifts, he possessed other talents worth developing. Specifically, the young man showed remarkable natural ability with lightsaber combat. Where his mother's students struggled with the physical demands of dueling, Lucien excelled, moving with grace and power that reminded Hazen of the boy's father. Under Hazen's tutelage, Lucien mastered Shii Cho, delving deeply into the form's principles and techniques. By his teenage years, he could easily defeat any of his mother's apprentices in sparring matches, including the legendary Fearin warrior Feln, who was considerably older and more experienced. This prowess did not earn him his mother's attention, as he might have hoped, but it did establish his reputation within the broader Jedi community as a formidable warrior. As Lucien matured and achieved the rank of Jedi Knight, he developed his own interpretation of Shii Cho, one that emphasized the form's aggressive aspects while maintaining the discipline that prevented descent into dark side corruption. His style was noted for its relentless pressure, for the way he would advance continuously, forcing opponents back, cutting off their angles of retreat, giving them no moment to catch their breath or regroup. This approach proved devastatingly effective in both practice and actual combat situations. The Padawan massacre of Taris, the tragic event that would define the latter portion of Lucien's life, showcased both his skill and the dangers inherent in Shii Cho's emotionally heated mindset. When the seers of his mother's Jedi Covenant experienced a shared vision, suggesting that one of their apprentices would bring ruin to the Order, Lucien made the terrible decision to execute all the Padawans to prevent the prophecy's fulfillment. The speed and efficiency with which he carried out this horrific act demonstrated his mastery of Form 1's lethal applications. During the long pursuit of Zane Carrick, the one Padawan who escaped the massacre, Lucien repeatedly demonstrated his combat abilities. He defeated multiple opponents, dismantled security droids, and navigated complex tactical situations with competence. Yet when he finally caught up with Zane, when master and former student faced each other with ignited lightsabers, something unexpected happened. Zane, despite his comparative lack of formal skill and his self-described awkward relationship with the Force, managed to match Lucien blade for blade. this outcome might seem contradictory. How could a mediocre Padawan stand against the Shii Cho master? The answer lay in factors beyond pure technical skill. Zane's luck, borderline supernatural in its consistency, caused Lucian's attacks to miss at critical moments or be interrupted by environmental factors. The emotional weight of the situation, the guilt and obsession that had consumed Lucian since the massacre, compromised his normally excellent focus. And perhaps most importantly, Zane fought with the desperate clarity of someone who had nothing left to lose, while Lucian struggled with the burden of his choices. The confrontation ended not with Zane's defeat, but with Lucian's realization that his path had led him astray, that the prophecy he had tried to prevent had in fact been brought about by his own actions. This moment of clarity, this recognition of how far he had fallen, came too late to undo the damage, but it at least prevented further tragedy. Lucien ultimately chose redemption over continued pursuit of his misguided goals, though the cost of that choice was the effective end of his career as a Jedi. Lucien Dry's story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers inherent in Shii Cho's philosophy. The form demanded determination, required practitioners to maintain an emotionally heated mindset, expected them to press their advantages and advance relentlessly. All of these qualities, when properly channeled through Jedi discipline and guided by connection to the light side, made for effective and ethical warriors. But when that discipline cracked, when fear or obsession corrupted the emotional foundation, those same qualities could lead to terrible outcomes. Mitra Surik, known to history as the Jedi Exile, represented a very different application of Form 1 principles. This human Jedi Master fought during the Mandalorian Wars. That brutal conflict that preceded the events of Lucien Dry's era by only a few years. Surik was remarkable for many reasons: her natural leadership abilities, her unusual relationship with the Force, her role in critical battles. But from a combat perspective, what distinguished her was her versatile approach to lightsaber forms. Unlike pure specialists who dedicated themselves to mastering a single form, Surik studied multiple styles, drawing techniques from each as situations demanded. Her foundation, like all Jedi, was Shii Cho. She mastered the form's basics early in her training and returned to them frequently throughout her career. But she also studied Form 2, Makashi, gaining the precision and economy of motion that style emphasized. And she learned Form 3, Soresu, the defensive form that would prove invaluable given the amount of blaster fire she faced during the wars. This combination of forms allowed Surik to adapt to virtually any combat situation. When facing multiple opponents or groups of enemies, she relied heavily on Shii Cho's wide, sweeping attacks and crowd control techniques. Against single opponents skilled in lightsaber combat, she could shift seamlessly into Makashi's more precise, dueling-focused approach. When under heavy fire or needing to buy time, Soresu's defensive blade work provided the protection she needed. Few opponents could predict which style she would employ at any given moment, and fewer still could adapt quickly enough when she transitioned between them mid-combat. During the catastrophic battle of Malachor V, the engagement that would ultimately cost Surik her connection to the Force, her mastery of multiple forms, including Shii Cho, proved essential to her survival. The battle was chaos incarnate, with thousands of combatants from multiple species and factions fighting across harsh terrain in the shadow of an ancient Sith academy. At various points, Surik found herself facing overwhelming numbers of Mandalorian warriors, each one a skilled combatant in their own right. Her Shii Cho training allowed her to engage multiple Mandalorians simultaneously, using the form's sweeping attacks to keep them at bay while working to thin their numbers. The Mandalorians, accustomed to fighting opponents who focused on single combat or tried to outmaneuver them, struggled against the relentless advancement that Shii Cho emphasized. Surik cut through their formations, disrupted their coordinated tactics, and forced them to fight on her terms rather than theirs. After the war, after Surik's self-imposed exile and eventual return to face the Sith triumvirate, her combat skills had only sharpened. She defeated Darth Sion, the Lord of Pain, whose undying body and mastery of the dark side made him one of the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy. She overcame Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger, whose ability to consume all life through the Force should have made him unbeatable. And finally, she faced her former master, Darth Traya, in the ruins of the Treyas Academy on Malachor V, defeating the Sith Lord despite Traya's use of 3 lightsabers simultaneously controlled through telekinetic power. In each of these battles, Surik's foundation in Shii Cho provided the base upon which her other techniques built. The form's principles of advancing steadily, cutting off angles, maintaining constant pressure, these remained constant regardless of which specific techniques she employed. Her story demonstrated that Shii Cho was not just the beginner's form to be left behind as one advanced, but rather the grammatical foundation upon which more complex combat sentences could be constructed. Shakti brought yet another perspective to Form 1 practice. This Togruta Jedi Master, distinguished by the distinctive colored patterns on her lekku and mantros, served on the Jedi Council during the Clone Wars and played crucial roles in several of the conflict's most important battles. While sources vary on her primary lightsaber form, with some suggesting emphasis on Makashi and Ataru, her training certainly included substantial work with Shii Cho, and she demonstrated its principles in various engagements. Shakti's assignment to Kamino, the water world where the clone army was produced, placed her in a unique position. She oversaw clone trooper training, working with the Kaminoan cloners and military instructors to ensure that the Republic's soldiers were properly prepared for combat. This role required her to understand not just advanced combat techniques, but also the fundamentals, the basic principles that could be taught to soldiers with limited training time. Shii Cho's simplicity and effectiveness made it ideal for this purpose. The clones under Shakti's supervision learned simplified versions of Form 1's techniques. They could not dedicate years to mastering the form as Jedi did, but they could learn enough to make them more effective when fighting alongside their Jedi generals. They practiced the wide, sweeping motions that Shii Cho emphasized, adapted for use with vibroblades and other physical weapons, rather than lightsabers. They trained to recognize the 8 target zones and to attack systematically rather than randomly. While they would never achieve mastery, these basics made them significantly more dangerous in close combat. During the Battle of Kamino, when separatist forces attacked the cloning facilities directly, Shakti's defensive efforts showcased Form 1's crowd control capabilities. She faced waves of battle droids and aqua droids, the latter specially designed to function in Kamino's oceanic environment. Her blue lightsaber moved in continuous arcs, creating an impassable barrier that destroyed any droid foolish enough to press too close. The wide, sweeping attacks of Shii Cho proved perfect for this defensive role, allowing her to protect key facilities while clone troopers focused on more mobile combat. Shakti's calm focus and methodical approach to combat reflected Shii Cho's philosophical emphasis on determination rather than passion. Unlike some practitioners who channeled intense emotion into their fighting style, she remained centered and composed even in the most chaotic situations. This composure allowed her to make tactical decisions clearly, to recognize when to hold position and when to advance, to adapt her strategy as the situation evolved. She demonstrated that the emotionally heated mindset Form 1 fostered did not necessarily mean losing control, that one could fight with intensity while maintaining inner calm. Her eventual fate, like that of so many Jedi, came during the execution of Order 66, the command that turned the clone troopers against their generals. The exact circumstances varied across different accounts, but regardless of the specific details, her death marked the end of an era and the loss of one of the Order's most skilled practitioners. Yet her legacy lived on in the clones she had trained, in the techniques she had taught, in the example she had set of what a Jedi should be. Obi-Wan Kenobi, though primarily known for his mastery of Form 3, Sora Su, maintained a strong foundation in Shii Cho throughout his life. Like all Jedi, he began his lightsaber training with Form 1, learning its stances and techniques as a youngling in the temple. Even after he specialized in Sora Su, developing one of the most impenetrable defenses in Jedi history, he continued to draw on Shii Cho principles when circumstances required. During his early years as Qui-Gon Jinn's Padawan, before he had fully committed to Sora Su, Obi-Wan relied more heavily on Form 1. His duel with Darth Maul on Naboo, the battle that cost Qui-Gon his life, showed elements of Shii Cho in his aggressive attacks after his master fell. The wide, powerful strikes he employed in that moment of rage and grief were not the refined techniques of Sora Su, but rather the more basic, emotionally driven attacks of Form 1. Only later, after reflecting on that battle and recognizing how close his emotions had brought him to the dark side, did Obi-Wan fully commit to the defensive philosophy of Sora Su. Even so, situations occasionally demanded that Obi-Wan set aside his preferred defensive approach and employ more aggressive tactics. When facing multiple opponents or fighting in environments where defense alone proved insufficient, he would fall back on the Shii Cho fundamentals he had learned as a child. These techniques, so deeply ingrained through early training, remained available to him even after decades of specializing in a different form. His instruction of Luke Skywalker aboard the Millennium Falcon, that brief lesson in deflecting blaster bolts from a training remote while wearing a helmet that blocked visual sight, drew directly on Shii Cho training methods. This was how younglings learned in the temple, how they first began to understand that the Force could guide their actions if they learned to trust it. By passing this technique to Luke, Obi-Wan ensured that the next generation, perhaps the last hope for the Jedi Order, would build on the same foundation that had served the Order for millennia. Beyond these prominent examples, countless other Jedi employed Shii Cho throughout galactic history. Temple guards, those anonymous sentinels who protected the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, trained extensively in Form 1. Their role required them to be prepared to face multiple intruders simultaneously, and Shii Cho's crowd control capabilities made it ideal for this purpose. Their distinctive yellow lightsaber pikes, double-bladed weapons that differed from standard lightsabers, adapted Shii Cho's principles to accommodate their unique armament. Lightsaber instructors, responsible for teaching new generations of Jedi, necessarily maintained expert knowledge of Form 1. Regardless of their personal specialization in other forms, they needed to be able to demonstrate Shii Cho techniques accurately and to identify and correct errors in their students' execution. Many of these instructors, having spent decades working with the form's fundamentals, developed insights and refinements that they passed on to their students, ensuring that Shii Cho continued to evolve slowly, even as it maintained its essential character. The form also found practitioners among those few Jedi who chose to specialize in it exclusively, who looked at the more advanced forms and decided that Form 1, properly mastered, needed no supplement. These specialists, rarer than those who focused on later forms, proved that dismissing Shii Cho as merely basic or primitive was a mistake. In the hands of someone who had dedicated their life to understanding every nuance of the form, who had explored every possible application and variation, Shii Cho became as sophisticated and effective as any other approach to combat. The legacy of Form 1 extends far beyond the specific individuals who practiced it. The form represents something fundamental about the Jedi Order and its approach to conflict. It embodies the tension between the necessity of violence and the commitment to peace, between the power to destroy and the responsibility to preserve. Every Jedi who ever ignited a lightsaber confronted this tension, and Shii Cho provided the framework within which they learned to navigate it. The emphasis on disarmament over killing, on Sun Gem as the primary goal of combat, reflected the Jedi's understanding that their power came with moral obligations. They could kill easily. The lightsaber made lethal force almost effortless, requiring no great strength or lengthy attack to end a life. But just because they could kill did not mean they should. The discipline required to choose the harder path, to disarm or disable rather than destroy, to show mercy to fallen enemies. This discipline was as central to being a Jedi as any ability to use the Force. Shii Cho taught this discipline from the very beginning of a Jedi's training, by introducing students to combat through a form that explicitly prioritized non-lethal resolution. The order ensured that their foundational understanding of lightsaber use aligned with Jedi philosophy. Later, if a Jedi chose to study forms that emphasized different priorities, the lethal efficiency of Form 7's Vapad, for instance, they did so with the ethical foundation of Shii Cho already established, already part of their psychological architecture. The form's survival across thousands of years, through the rise and fall of countless Jedi generations, through wars and peace, through the discovery of new Force abilities and the development of new combat techniques, testifies to the fundamental soundness of its design. Forms that did not work, that proved ineffective or dangerous or incompatible with Jedi philosophy, were abandoned or heavily modified. Shii Cho endured largely unchanged because it addressed eternal needs: the need for effective combat techniques, the need for training methods suitable for beginners, the need for a fallback option when other approaches failed. As the galaxy has moved forward, as the Jedi Order itself has faced near extinction and possible rebirth, the lessons of Shii Cho remain relevant. The form's emphasis on versatility, on being prepared for multiple opponents and unpredictable situations, reflects wisdom that transcends specific combat techniques. In an uncertain galaxy, where threats emerge from unexpected directions and take forms that no one anticipated, rigid specialization can become a liability. The practitioner who masters one approach to the exclusion of all others may find themselves helpless when circumstances demand something different. Shii Cho guards against this danger by remaining the foundation upon which all other techniques build, by continuing to be taught to every student regardless of their eventual specialization. The form ensures that even the most specialized expert retains versatility. The Makashi duelist who faces multiple opponents can fall back on Shii Cho. The Ataru acrobat who finds themselves in a confined space can employ Form 1's more straightforward techniques. The Soresu defender who needs to seize initiative can draw on the aggressive advancements that Shii Cho emphasizes. This function as foundation and fallback might seem unglamorous compared to the spectacular displays of other forms. Form 4's aerial spins and flips, Form 7's barely controlled fury, Form 2's elegant precision. These catch the eye and capture the imagination in ways that Shii Cho's straightforward simplicity might not. Yet glamour and effectiveness are not synonymous. The most important techniques are often the most basic, the principles that remain valid regardless of circumstance, the skills that save lives not through spectacular displays, but through reliable, consistent performance. In the training halls of any Jedi temple, past or future, Shii Cho will always have its place. New students will still learn the 8 target zones, will still practice the opening stances, will still execute their first tentative horizontal slashes under the guidance of patient instructors. They will discover, as countless students before them discovered, that the form is simultaneously simple and profound, basic and sophisticated, easy to learn and impossible to fully master. Those students who continue their training, who advance to study other forms and develop their own unique approaches to combat, will carry Shii Cho with them. It will be there in their muscle memory, in the automatic responses that years of practice have burned into their nervous systems. It will be there in their philosophical understanding of what combat means and what responsibilities come with the power to end lives. It will be there as a reminder that sophistication without foundation is fragile, that complexity without basics is brittle, that the most advanced techniques ultimately rest on fundamental principles that never change. And when those advanced students face their own crucial battles, when circumstance pushes them to their limits and tests everything they have learned, they may find themselves returning to Form 1. In that moment of crisis, the wide sweeping attacks that seemed so basic in the training hall will become salvation. The emotionally heated mindset that required such careful control will provide the determination needed to persevere. The Sun Gem philosophy that prioritizes preservation of life will offer guidance when easier, darker paths present themselves. This is the true legacy of Shii Cho, not the spectacular victories or the legendary masters, important as those are, but the quiet, constant presence of fundamental wisdom that guides every Jedi, every student of the blade, every warrior who must balance the necessity of violence with the commitment to peace. As long as anyone studies the lightsaber, as long as the Force requires defenders, as long as light stands against darkness, Form 1 will endure. The blade ignites with its characteristic snap hiss, casting blue or green or white light across the practitioner's face. The opening stance is assumed, weight balanced, blade angled upward at 45 degrees. The target zones are noted, numbered 1 through 8 in the ancient manner. The enemy advances, and the student of Shii Cho, drawing on knowledge passed down through 10,000 years and 10,000 masters, does what comes naturally now after so much practice. They move forward, blades sweeping in wide arcs, determined and focused, advancing step by step, protecting those who need protection, confronting those who must be confronted, carrying forward the legacy of the oldest and most fundamental form of lightsaber combat, the way of the Sarlacc, the determination form, Shii Cho, Form 1, where it all began, where it all returns, where the student becomes the master, and the master remembers what it meant to be a student. The circle completes, and in completing begins again, as it has for millennia, as it will for millennia more, as long as anyone needs to know the weight of a lightsaber's hilt and the responsibility of its blade. Thank you for watching this deep exploration of Form 1 Shii Cho. If you found this journey through the oldest and most fundamental lightsaber combat form fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments which aspect of Shii Cho interests you most, or which other lightsaber form you'd like us to explore in future videos. Share your thoughts, your theories, your favorite moments from the Star Wars universe involving Form 1 practitioners. Until next time, may the Force be with you, and may your blade find the wisdom that comes from understanding where all things begin.